Okay. This topic is why you should teach your kids through scary stories.
No!
So, I've listened to several of the interviews you've had. I don't feel this has been touched upon enough because, honestly, this is my favorite part of the book. And I'll start off by giving an example. I was reading this chapter, and my goal was, for the past month, how can I get Juniper to clean up after herself? There are toys sprawled everywhere, and she won't do it. Sometimes we'll do it together, sometimes, but it's not consistent. I need a 100% hit rate here. I want it. So
it's okay to need 100%.
I read through this part of the chapter, which is teaching children through these fantastical, scary stories. I'm reading it. It's maybe 8 o'clock, so it's almost bedtime. I'm reading it. Juniper's here sitting next to me, kind of reading too. And I close the book and I tell her, Juniper, have I told you the story about the monster who lives in the attic? She closes her book immediately. No, Papi, tell me. Engaged immediately.
Totally.
And I go on and tell her this story of this monster that lives in the attic that is waiting for your toys to take them all away. And if they're on the floor, this monster is going to take it. So what we need to do is we need to clean it all up immediately. Without telling her anything to do, we're starting to clean up together. And we have honestly, since telling that story, we have cleaned up together every night. Sometimes I'll have to remind her, of course. Sometimes I'll have to remind her. But
you might have to take the toys one night.
Yeah. And so I love this. This is my favorite part of the book. So I want to give this to you. I think it's the Inuit culture where you learn this, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about it. And I'd love to hear more about the stories and the monsters that you have at your house.
This wonderful Inuit woman, Mina Ishilatar, told me about these stories a lot, almost 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Oh my gosh, so long ago. And I totally brushed them off. I was like, that's too scary.
Too scary.
I'm never going to do this with Rosie. And then a couple months later, I was like trying to get Rosie to close the refrigerator. And I was like telling her all about electricity and money and climate change. And I mean, I was really going. She was 3 at the time, right? So she was really doing it. No, she wasn't. And then I thought of Mina and I was like, there's a monster in the refrigerator and the door stays open. He's going to warm up and come get you. And she like slams the refrigerator closed and turns to me just like Juniper and is like, tell me more. Tell me about that monster. Yeah. These stories really changed us because we weren't communicating at all before. It was me treating her like she was, a 25-year-old climate change scientist.
Yes.
And, she's 3. And I started learning about them. And it turns out that this is probably, like I say in the book, I challenge you to find a culture that doesn't use scary stories to teach kids things. And they don't have to be super scary. My husband goes overboard with them. She starts crying, and I'm like, no, this is not the point. The point is to just engage, like you say, draw them in and communicate something to them that's important that they can't understand otherwise. Yeah. And so every culture uses them. A lot of cultures use them when it comes to dangerous things in the environment, cliffs or water or swamps or the woods. You can get lost in the woods. And so there's fairies, there's goblins, there's monsters, there's a lot of cultures have water animals, like a water horse is in that. I'm Irish, so in the Celtic culture, there's a water horse that if you get too close to the water, he'll drag you down into the water. In the Inuit culture, it's, I'm going to mess up the name, but it's this monster that does the same thing, basically comes out in the water and brings you down. But, oh my gosh, we had a few monsters that were regulars in the house. Every day they came. And as Rosie learned those have faded. I have to say she's 6 now, so she knows they're not real now.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, but she still loves them. She still loves learning about them and new ones, and she creates ones. That's great. She told me one day, I was trying to convince her of something, and she said, well, you didn't tell me a monster was going to come, so I didn't know it was important. I was like, okay, that's all I need to do.
Yeah.
You know, we had one about cleaning up her clothes because she would just take off her clothes and just leave them. Of course, and I was so frustrated with it. So one night a monster came and took all of the clothes.
Yeah.
Literally came and took them. The ones, and it was her favorite bathing suit. And she was upset about it. And she wrote this letter to the monster and was like, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. She's like, do you think he'll come back? And this was like a month ago. So she knows it wasn't real. And so I brought the clothes back and she has picked up her clothes
ever since.
Completely since. Like, and you know, there's been a lot of research on this, especially in hunter-gatherer cultures, the stories. And you know, and they have stories too for very complex things like gender equality, sharing, generosity, you know, very, very complex values that they transmit through stories. I mean, you don't have to be 3. You learn it. We learn through stories. You know, people are built to learn through stories.
Yes.
And in fact, some people think it's what allowed us to be such good hunters. Is that if you think about, like, if you're going to cooperatively hunt, which is what humans used to, you know, can do really well, still do, you have to work together. And some people think that the ability to tell a story, like, okay, I'm going to go down to the river and I'm going to cross over, you're going to go over to the ridge and we're going to meet over here, is a story, right?
Yes.
And so a lot of people think it's one of the key things that makes us human. And so that instinct in the children is super, super strong. And a lot of parents will tell me, well, I don't want to scare them. And again, the point is not to scare them. And all kids have their, you know, different thresholds.
Yeah.
But you can watch the kid and see what, you know, what's really engaging
how far you
them.
Want to push it, yeah.
And I have to say that a lot of the Disney movies are like 10 times scarier to Rosie than any monster story that I
like Teika and Moana. I don't know if you guys have seen it.
Oh my god!
I'm scared of that monster.
Yeah, or that thing in The Little Mermaid, that purple thing.
Ursula, maybe.
Yeah, maybe Ursula. That thing scared me. I was scared of like Bambi when I was a kid. So.
I wanna add to this. I've heard the same when I tell my friends about this. That I don't want to scare them, and I think we've covered that they like to be scared a little bit. So there's a threshold, and you as the parent need to know where that line is drawn. But I also want to add, imagine, Michaeleen, in the clothing example, that instead of telling her that a monster took it, you tell her, I took it from you to punish you.
Right.
That's instant tension, right?
Right.
All of a sudden, she's not learning. Mm-hmm.
And you're the enemy. You're the bad
enemy,
guy.
Yes. So what I love about this is that you and the child are not in tension. You're together, working together to battle the monster. So you're a team, and it just works so well, right? Because I have so many of my friends who do something similar about cleanup, but instead of telling them the monster will take it, it's like, I will throw away your toys if you don't clean it up. Now, what ends up happening, right? You have that tension, and also what's going to happen if you don't tell them to do it or if you're not there? You're basically training them. They're only going to clean up if you're there to reinforce it. But if the monster's there, it's like the monster's always there.
Yeah, I say that in the book. I say, growing up, like, I was afraid of my dad's anger. I did things, and even now I do things at work because I don't want to make people angry. And I would much rather Rosie be like afraid of some fictitious monster, which she thinks is fun now, than be afraid of me, right? I can't remember which group it's in, but in one of the studies, a parent says this, like, we don't want our kids to feel like we're the enemies. Mm-hmm. We'd much rather them just be afraid of some fictitious thing that eventually they know is not true. And it's about communicating with a child that doesn't have the reality that you have. Like, one of the moms told me recently, which I thought was really interesting. She said, we think we have a shared reality with young children, right? But we don't, right? Our world is not what their world is. And the stories kind of help bridge those two realities, I think, a little bit. It's ubiquitous. It is ubiquitous. And any parent that thinks their child is not learning through stories is crazy, because if they're watching any sort of TV or video
movies,
games,
stories, video, everything has a story. Yes.
Everything has a story, and that's how they learn. I mean, there is so much data on that. That's how people learn, is through a story.
Can I add? I want to tell you 3 things that's very closely related. I want to tell you 2 of our favorite monsters are at home.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Okay, so Juniper, my 4-year-old, loves staying in the bathtub forever. And I was getting so frustrated. Please, we need to go to bedtime. I tried everything.
I would just let her stay there. I would just be like, just stay in there. I'm reading a book.
Yeah. And please just get out. I need to dry you. I need to soap you up. All these things. Nothing was working. I tried a timer. I tried all these things. Nothing. So I told her, there's this monster, Kawa. And most of our monsters have a Japanese name. Kawa means river in Japanese.
Nice.
And this monster is waiting for kids that are staying too long in the bathtub. And where their fingers are super, super, super wrinkly. Not just a little bit wrinkly, but
perfect.
And it comes out of the drain, grabs you, and drags you down, and will never see you again. No, Poppy. She's but tell me more. And instantly, Poppy, we need to hurry up. Come on, so soaping her up. I'm like, hurry, soaping her up. And since then, no challenges being in the bathtub. The second one, which you'll love, is when we go now to the playgrounds, I now take my book, and instead of being like, the parents who are there with the child the entire time, I'm sitting there chilling, reading my book. I think you do something very similar. Is that correct?
All the time, even to this day.
And I don't want her to run out and where it's dangerous. Like, stay in the playground because I'm not necessarily actively paying attention to it. So I told her about Yama, which means mountain in Japanese. And Yama is the monster from the mountains that is looking for little kids that leave the playground area without their parents to take them away. So now she knows. She doesn't leave the playground area.
That's very Inuit. That's how they teach them to not, because there's polar bears, right? And that's how they teach them. And when we were there, one of the little girls wouldn't go on the playground because a kid had broke their wrist on the playground. Oh. And the little 6-year-old stopped right at the edge of the playground. Yeah. And I was like, what's wrong? And she told me that, like, her mom had told her, like, you go on that playground, something's going to hurt your wrist. And that kid was, like, serious about it.
Yeah.
That's exactly great.
The mother didn't even have to be there to reinforce the rules. Like, go onto that playground and you are grounded. No.
Right? No, exactly. It's that idea, right, that they're capable beings of thinking, and you don't have to hover over them. They have autonomy because you've taught them, right? You just can't teach them through logic quite yet.
And can I tell you one more? I think
yes, I love them.
So we have several monsters. This one, I've now evolved the stories where they're not necessarily just about monsters. So I'll give you an example.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, all stories are good. Kids just love stories.
Along the lines of encouragement. So Juniper, for a while, was constantly sucking on her fingers. And I would get so annoyed and angry. The voice of my dad would pop into my head. Stop sucking your like just very angrily. Get your fingers out of your mouth. Right. And that's how I started off. Get your fingers out of your mouth. She would get it out, and then, of course, a few minutes later, back in there. Yeah. And I would say things, take your fingers out of your mouth, or I'm going to put this cream on it, which she really didn't like. And she's like, no, I don't want the cream, and then she wouldn't do it. But then, of course, behind my back, or when I wasn't there, she would still do it. In bed, as I'm laying her in bed for bedtime, and we're calming down, I can hear her sucking on her fingers. And she would say, Papi, don't look at me. And I'm like, oh my God. So I would turn around and I could see that she's hear her sucking her fingers. Okay, so what I say is, I told her the story of a girl who lives in San Francisco who was constantly sucking her fingers. And she sucked it so much that it started getting irritated. And it got so irritated that her fingers fell off. And she's like, no, Papi, no. Ever since then, she stopped sucking her. All this that I was telling you, I'm going to punish you, or don't do this, don't do that, just worked against me. And I told her this simple story, and now she doesn't suck her fingers anymore.
No. We did something similar with Rosie. And sucking her thumb.
Oh, sucking, yeah.
And then we were at this gas station in San Francisco, and there was a guy who didn't have a thumb. And I told her, and this is how terrible I am, but the stories are always more effective, if there's, like, something real that they see, right? Mm-hmm. And so I looked over at her, and I said, you see the guy over there? He doesn't have a thumb. And she said, yeah. And I was like, and I, like, showed her, like, then he, and I didn't say much. I just showed her, like, he was sucking it, like... And yeah, that was it. That was like the nail in the coffin, It's interesting because a lot of times the stories will relate to something kind of mythical or unexplainable in the world. So, like, in the environment. They work really well. Like the Northern Lights, a lot of the stories in the Arctic are about the Northern Lights, so it's always good to grab something from their world that they actually see, but you can't really explain. And then, it's fantastic. I mean, it's so much fun. I mean, it's so much more fun than like yelling or
punishing
and it
so
builds communication, right? Like even to this day at night, Rosie will be like, tell me a story. Tell me.
Tell me the story. Oh my God.
Tell me more stories.